Hello everybody, in the immortal words of Michael Keaton, you want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. And as cars go, this is about as nuts as they come. This is a 1992 Autozam AZ1. This last week I have had a flurry of K cars on the channel. Just in case you've been living under a rock, K is a Japanese category of car defined by its size, weight and power. It is the smallest class of car in Japan and was designed essentially to promote cheap, affordable transport after the Second World War. However, as time moved on, the definition of what was affordable changed dramatically. Come the late 1980s and Japan was experiencing an economic boom. This led to what many consider to be the country's golden era in terms of automotive output. We saw the likes of the Toyota Supra, the Honda NSX and the Mazda RX-7. This also happens to be a product of the Mazda company, but as you will see, there is not a single Mazda badge on it. Autozam is the brand. AZ1 is the model, and as the side will tell you, this is a rather fruity thing. The majority of K cars the public will be familiar with come in one of two flavours, either a box, something like the Suzuki Alto, the Wagon R, cars designed to fit as closely as they can within the confines of the K car category and provide the maximum space. The other commonly known car is the two-seater fun convertible, something like the Suzuki Cappuccino that I drove the other day. This takes a totally different approach, one I suppose followed later on by the Honda S660. It is a two-door, mid-engined, sporty coupe. The car also has gull wing doors for added James Bond effect and some rather remarkable engineering that we'll get onto in a minute. In the 1980s, Suzuki had already been looking at building a mid-engined K car, but for whatever reason decided not to continue. Mazda picked up the mantle and did a design study with 3 different body shells on essentially this platform. This, I believe, was Type A, and you can see more than a little bit of influence from the European sports cars of the time. The side strakes on the side, the rear wing at the back, those are pure Ferrari. Even the interior, which, yes, is quite cramped, is also very racy. You've got these cool little windows that only open just a little bit. That's it. Luckily, the aircon works very well. You have bucket seats that I really rather like. They've got red inserts in them, and the only storage space in the car of note is the bit you can see behind me. Now, there's supposed to be a spare wheel there, but we'll also get onto that in a little bit too. I've never been quite sure why, but the Japanese seem to have an affinity for spinning cars off into sub-brands. I know the Americans do a lot of it, but I think the Japanese may be even worse. In the case of Mazda in the 1980s, you had Mazda themselves, you had the Unos brand for what they called the RoadStr, i.e. the MX-5, and also the Ifini brand, how you pronounce it I really don't know, but that's the one that had the RX-7. Autozam also existed, but had no flagship car. This was designed to be that. The car, as was tradition back then, was originally debuted at a motor show, where it received a very warm reception, but was quite far away from being production ready. To get the car from concept to production, Mazda dropped in one of their top guys, Toshihiko Hirai, known to many as the father of the MX-5. As that car had been so successful, he seemed to be the natural man to make the AZ1 a reality. He never saw it as a dream assignment and figured he may have been something of a sacrificial lamb, there to take all of the blame if it didn't work out so well. He made many changes, beginning with the headlights. The concept car had little pop-up ones that looked very cool, but in his words added simply cost and complexity to a car that was supposed to have not much of either. They were also a source of potential problems when it came to crash legislation, and that's the reason why up front it looks like you should have a spare wheel there, but it actually never went there, instead being parked behind the driver. As you'll note, it is currently not here because the space is instead used for storage. Entertainingly, though it may seem to be the most Japanese of all cars, a lot of development work was actually done here in Britain, at a company called Hawtall Whiting down in Basildon. They were responsible for constructing the prototypes and also doing a lot of crash testing work. They rolled one and lived, so it's actually got some real engineering behind it. And that's one of the reasons why Andy, this car's owner, bought it. He is an engineer, though of a different type, and he loves the crazy kind of work and design that went into making this car. Because you have a steel monocoque, all one big piece, including this is one item. It is clothed in exclusively plastic panels. They're not fiberglass, they are injection molded plastic. And that must have cost a fortune, especially when you consider that fewer than 4,500 of these were actually ever made. All of those panels are simply screwed onto the body, meaning they can all be removed and the car will still drive, much like the Pontiac Fiero and the BMW Z1. Despite being a product of Mazda, there's actually quite a bit of Suzuki in this car. The engine is the same as you'd find in an early Cappuccino, an F6A, and much of the suspension is from the Alto works. It is perhaps for this reason that many people wrongly assume Suzuki also built the car. They did not. Production was contracted out to another firm who built it at a plant in Hiroshima. Andy is a big fan of mid-engine sports cars, has owned a number of Lotus and even a Ferrari. When he bought this, he had a 328 and a Lotus Esprit. He sold the 328 because as soon as he got the AZ1, he found himself not really driving it. And if you want to take something to a car show that people are really going to love looking at, this will beat pretty much any Ferrari fairly easily. He describes the handling as being somewhat akin to an old Lotus Europa. Although that may seem like a silly idea at first, now I'm behind the wheel, that doesn't seem quite so mad. To put his theory fully to the test, I suppose we need to give it the beans. The car revs to over 8,000 after all. But I have been told that the aircon, which works beautifully, does sap a little bit of power, so I will disengage that. I've diverted power from life support to the thrusters. Let's go. This is actually one of the most technical, challenging and intriguing cars I think I've ever driven. The comparison with the Europa really isn't as far-fetched as you might think. Once you're up to speed, the unassisted steering is absolutely fingertip light. The tiniest of movements will have the biggest of impacts. The steering's only 2 turns lock to lock anyway. What's also surprising is the ride comfort. This is sublime. It's not sat on the original steel wheels, which look desperately cool. It's got some sporty and larger items, but even still, the ride is far from ruined. It's amazing. You do sit essentially on the floor, which is quite worrying for roads like this. Come on. Power seems to sort of tail off when you get to about 6,000 RPM. By the rules of Japan at the time, these are limited to 64 horsepower, and they all feel like they really want to make quite a bit more. After all, it is a double overhead cam turbocharged 660cc, so 64 horsepower I don't think is really stressing it all that much. Give these between 80 and 100 and they really do tend to come alive. But it's that handling which is beguiling, if not outright terrifying, because it is so comfortable, so soft, but also so agile. You're in this sort of constant battle between the car tipping in and feeling like it wants to rotate. And given the fact that it's on tiny, skinny tyres with a really short wheelbase, I expect getting it to rotate is far from impossible. I wouldn't want to drive it in the wet. The gearbox is brilliant, really nice. It's not even a bad noise that it makes. This one has the Mazda Speed exhaust on it. It didn't come from factory that way. He actually pinched it off the other one that he restored from essentially the ground up. During that process, he learned that these cars are excellent to work on. Compared to the Lotus or his Ferrari, it is a dream. Every single piece on the car has been designed so that with only one hand you can screw or unscrew it. No British spec three-handed nightmare bolts here. There's even lots of room in the back around the engine, which you wouldn't expect. I read that some of the original plans for this car involved making it a 2+2. Plus 2 what? Cats? You wouldn't get 2 people in the back of this, no way. I don't care how dinky they are. Unless they're still fresh. I mean, no way. No way. The brakes feel like they have way more power than they could possibly need. Pedal feel is really good. Oh, it's brilliant, this thing. And all that at about 40 miles an hour. Feels like you're on the ragged edge, but you're not. I've barely troubled the speed limit. The clocks down here are still in metric, but handily, a little GPS-based mile-per-hour speedo has been fitted here as a heads-up display. It's very handy. I like that. Like all other K cars, because it's absolutely minuscule, only 1.4 meters wide and 3.3 meters long, you can take any number of lines through the bend and not even worry about crossing the white line. Lift off, you get a little boo from the turbo. Yo, bless its heart. It's like it's got a cold. Well, the brakes are really good. I thought I was going to go through the windscreen. Turning circle's not bad either. And visibility, as you might expect, is fantastic. I made reference earlier to the Mazda Speed version. If you were thinking that the factory built a nice hotted up version of this with a bigger turbo, more power, you would be wrong. Unfortunately, if you gave the car more than 64 horsepower, it wouldn't be a K car anymore. The Mazda Speed version has a few different things about it, some different styling, the different exhaust and some other pieces. But Andy's not actually such a big fan because he said the quality of the different panels, which are made from fiberglass, is nowhere near as good as those on the regular car. Tragically, in the time it took them to bring this car to market, the once very buoyant Japanese economy sank in a rather spectacular way. As a result, though they made 4,500 of these, they struggled to sell them. That is why they built 400 Mazda Speed items to try and cook up a little bit of interest. It didn't help either that these were only marginally cheaper than the much larger and more luxurious, in the context of this, MX-5. Eventually, Mazda agreed to sell 500 of them to Suzuki, who built their own version called the Kara. And where the MX-5 was a smash hit around the globe, because of its very nature, the Autozam was only ever really going to appeal to a Japanese audience. As time has progressed, this has become something of a cult classic, and today they command reasonable prices. Between £10,000 and £15,000 seems to be the going rate, but I am told, as with many K cars, their price is on the rise rapidly. This is no doubt a combination of factors, including the general increasing desirability of anything cool, old and Japanese, the fact people want different and interesting transport, they're no longer obsessed with the latest, the greatest and the fastest, and no doubt the fact it's just such a weird, wonderful and all-round strange bit of kit. I rather like it. McLaren clearly took some inspiration for the 720S from the AZ1, because this also has little glass panels above you that do help make this feel like a much lighter and airier and more spacious thing than it really is. And he also wasn't joking when he said that the aircon button really does kill the power, because with the AC on, though it blows nice and icy cold, it also feels like you've just hit the learner switch. The car has no power. Anyway, I think this is a great way of rounding out a week of rather unusual and quite diminutive Japanese cars. A huge thank you to Andy for bringing it out, and to you as ever for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you are, do make sure you hit the bell notification icon so you'll be told whenever I release a new video. And I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.